Okay, so welcome again. This is Sam Talks. Today our topic is going to be on reports. There's a lot to cover on reports because there's just a lot of different tools that you can use and a lot of ways that you can work with reports. So we'll talk first about how do you access reports. There's a couple of ways that people will see reports in their site. I am on the cover or the home page. I've just logged into this site. And first, well, there's actually two ways to access reports right here. There's my report menu. And this is literally mine and only mine as the person that's logged in to the site. So I am able to customize my report menu by clicking edit and adding or removing reports from here. So I'll probably talk about report menus a little bit later, but that's how I can get reports. One way I can get reports on my menu that I think are important to my job. All users can do that, add reports. I believe if a user has a permission that limits access to some records or types of records, those reports would not be available to them. The other way that you can, as a user, look at reports is through the report menu on the sidebar. So it's collapsible if you want to get it out of your way, or you can open it up. And if I click on, let me just do something like birth mother reports, you can see that my report menu here changes. It's now showing all the reports that we have built in this site based on the birth mother entity type. So all of these then I can access if I have permissions that allow me access to this by clicking on the name of a report. And so I can pop in order to see that. So the last way that I can think of accessing reports is through settings up at the top right of the screen. And this would really be more for SAM leads or administrators of the site. When it goes to the settings screen, there's a report section. And this is, again, where all of your reports are. When you access the reports through here, you're going to be taken to the report builder rather than for the specific report, rather than the report itself, like it was showing from the home page. But you can also get and open the report from here. Before I click down, so it's a long list of every report. We have seen agencies with thousands of reports in here. So you manage reports. If you don't need a report any longer, you can get rid of it because it can always be rebuilt in efforts to clean up your site and make it more accessible for your team. Other ways to filter reports is through this section here. I don't generally use the field. It's very, very specific. But if you're looking for accounting information and you're specifically looking for amount received, if I choose a field, I'm going to get pretty narrow results. But I can also filter by accounting AR on the table, so the specific table that information is based off of. And I believe more reports here just showed up. So some of these are just not showing the amount received, but they do show data from the accounting AR table. So this I use constantly to just narrow down in client sites when people are asking us to look at information that may be custom to your SAM site specifically.
Don't go anywhere. You're gonna get a 404. Okay.
Okay.
You're good now.
I'm good now. Okay. The view all will open up for everything. And we are just pushed up a development ticket that solves a request that people missed from the old version of SAM. So it's just kind of doing refresh of things here. View all, though, is going to open up and remove any of the filters that we have so that we can see everything yet again. Let's go, I'll go here, back to the home screen and look at a report based on placements. So again, this is my report menu. The other, actually, sorry, y'all, there is one more spot. So under my records, how you access the entity homepage. I don't know that we have a title for these screens. Your team can actually, so I clicked on my records and I clicked on family, and it's going to open up the family's quick search, and a report menu is also here. This seems to be somewhat underutilized in client sites, but where your this report menu here is shared amongst your team. So all team members can access and see these reports. They may not have permission. So when they access a report that their permission level doesn't actually allow them to see, pretty sure they're going to get an access denied message. But if they can view and open all of the tables on the report, this is a great way to say, you know, for your team meetings, having a group of reports, here are the families that are in the inquiry stage, or these are the families that we're working on home studies, or these are the families where we've got expiring documents, or children where we've got progress reports that are up and coming, and we need to get them on our schedule so we get them done in time rather than late, or have to really depend on an email saying that something is late. Let's be proactive and put it on so you can see things that are up and coming if you've got due dates associated and things like that. But reports that you often use, you could have matching reports here for birth mothers and families to make the match. So when you've got a brand new birth mother that needs a placement, or a new child that's referred and you're looking for active foster families that have space in their home, having reports right here that are common that your team members can access is really helpful. And you've got these report menus on every tab. So this site has a lot of different entity types, maybe more than what your organization has, but each of them can open up and you can have your own report menus that, again, is just shared amongst your team so that everybody knows that's the report, rather than, right, two reports literally may be titled the same or similarly, but if their records, if their filters are different, or yeah, really it relates to the filters, or I was gonna think like the columns are different. You may be literally talking about apples and oranges as far as having a way to compare data points. So that's how all the different ways that you can access a report. When I'm in a report, I've got a lot of tools to play with. These are accordions here that open up report stats. Stats aggregate the data that you're seeing. I think these are somewhat underutilized. I think a lot of times people pull the data out of SAM and go manipulate it in an Excel spreadsheet, create pivot tables, things like that. This is kind of SAM's version of pivot table. They're very simple, so you can do more advanced things in Excel than you'll be able to do here. But you can use common categories or dates and aggregate those dates into like this is placement start dates, so we can see all of the different records in a specific year that have a placement start date of whatever that particular year is. You're able to do dates by a couple different things. I believe it's the specific date, which is only really going to make sense for last month's information, right? You'll start to have way too many dates in here. By year, as we can see here, you could do it by year and quarter, and I think just by month, and I think by quarter as well. So depending on how you're looking and at data, you can pull aggregates a couple different ways when you're looking at a date field. So like here is the month, and so we happen to have more placements in April than we have in December Doesn't matter what year, but that's what that is showing. And if that's helpful information, that's a way that you can get that. So looking at things maybe for 1 year and the applications that came in, so you can see the trend and the pattern of how applications came in, especially if you're targeting it with any campaigns that you were doing, that could be really helpful, right? If you put some campaign in place in February, you would anticipate March and April, May, you're going to see higher applications, hopefully, if everything goes, how we want it to go. So these are really cool. You can pull information, counts and percentages. You can also filter by these. So for Lisa, we're going to pull all of her caseload. I think I see oftentimes people having many reports for all the different people that work in your organization, which then means you have more administration to manage rather than everybody being consistent in what they're looking at. This is a great way to see caseload. It's easy to see we're not actually doing data entry real well. And Lisa has a lot more than Harlem Nana. So we want to maybe balance out our caseload a bit more. Those are things that you could pull from here. If I click on Lisa, the report is going to be filtered now to just those kids and placements where Lisa is listed as the agency caseworker. So these are definitely things that you use to customize your reports. Because there are some fields that come by default with the system, but oftentimes agencies create new roles on their client records. You'll use the data points that are most important for your organization. The other thing that this can do, let's see here, looking at these, is I'm going to hit on this placement end date. I can edit the settings here. And I can pull in another total. So now that I know from this, I've got placement end date entered. I'm actually going to put in, we'll do all of these. The totals, the average, and the minimum max of the placement length, right? So placements that ended in 2018, how long is the total? The thing that I'm not sure about total is if that really makes sense. So I'm going to leave that as it is, and we'll look and see. These are based on number of days. So of course, 2018 is not a really good example because there's only one, so everything's the same. But we had 3 placements end in 2017. Our total days, I don't think this necessarily makes sense because I believe that is counting the total number of days for all 3 of those placements. I wouldn't say that's a very helpful bit of information, but on average, the length of time that a kid was in care when that placement ended in 2017 is 344 days. Our data is not very good. Our data just gets old after a while. So that may feel like a long time, but maybe not, because that's just about a year that a kid is in care versus there's one of the placements probably ended at 59 days. And the very longest was 639 days in this example. And we can pull these to see those kids here. All really cool information to get really quickly out of a report stat. And you can build them, I believe, off of every field that you've built in the system. So even if a field is brand new and is a custom field to your site, you can pull data on that. So you're not limited by what InReach Solutions provides by default. You're really like any of the characteristics of adoptive child preferences or how you match, all of that stuff can be pulled. The most important thing, though, about a report is the report configuration. This tells you how that report is actually set up. And this is the only thing that will allow you to compare an apple with an apple. If we're talking about a report, right? You cannot, if we were pulling children and placements did not have this filter, that it must be in results, or we're talking about child with child location timeline, very different tracking in the site. So it's not, while they're connected, placements and child location timeline, they are just different tables. So you can literally only compare two reports if the tables and the filters are identical to say what's going on with them if they look different. And that's, again, like if you have a bunch of reports based off some caseworker A's caseload, caseworker B's caseload, if those filters start to be manipulated in a way that makes them different, you will get different results. Tables can be edited here. One thing, let's see, a couple of things to note here is you want to be clear on the tables that you're pulling on a report. You do not need to have all tables that you could possibly pull on a report onto a report. You really want to either be using data, a column from the table, or a field from the table as a column on the report, or as a filter. Otherwise, that table should not be included on that particular report. It will and does have the potential to skew results. So just making your reports very clear of what tables are included on them. Must be in results is a way of filtering the report when we go in and edit the tables. Must be results, be in results is saying, I only want to look at kids who have a placement record. So we may have more child records in this database, but some of them do not have a placement. So let me backtrack just a smidge so we can actually see the data. Let me click this on default. We have 100 kids here and 141 placements. If I go and manipulate this report or modify it to exclude that and press save, our report numbers are going to be different. And they're going to be different because we're going to have kids that do not have placements, right? It went up fairly significantly, actually. 600 of the youth in this system, this test system, actually do not have placements, but our placement count actually remained the same. So the way you structure a report is how your records are created. Reports are views, or are views of a subset of your data. And so a report, again, can be thrown away and rebuilt. But the data that's displayed on the report really is your team's responsibility to manage. You're welcome anytime to ask us for support on it, because we don't actually input records. The records that are displayed on the report are either going to mean, like if there's a record that's missing, that the filter needs to be modified, or the record may need to be changed in some way to fall in line with the filters on the report. But this is, again, just a view of your data. It's not the end all, I guess, of how your report, like what the final count of your report is. I think is you definitely need to audit reports, I guess is what I'm saying. Is it's important, and that is a responsibility for SAM leads at your team or at your agency to look at records, kind of audit periodically. That's determined by your team's policies as well, is what's an appropriate time to do some internal auditing before you give final reports off to licensors or board members that need to see information to ensure that all your records are actually falling in line with that. Let's see. So other things that you can do with reports. At default, here. So default is going to bring it back to the beginning. Sometimes if you've gone and done a lot of filtering and stuff, you may want to just start over. We've noticed after lots of fiddling with a report that you may just need to like click back where the URL looks simple again and where it's got really just the report ID listed. If you're unsure how to get to that, because it can get squabbly looking once you've added a lot of filters, taken them off, kind of fiddled with it, just go back and access the report from how you originated from it, or click in edit and then go back and open the report as its default state. Let's see. The search does allow you to do filtering on the report. That is not something that's saved in the defaults of the filters for the report, but it is if we are playing on this report, trying to narrow down these 700 kids to a certain set of placements. So I can add filters. I get to decide what field I want to choose. I might say at this point, I want to do placements where the start date is not empty. So at least we are saying we have a placement record, but I don't know if you guys can see this or caught this as fast as I did here. Our report that said, or when we had it filtered to must include placements, actually had more placements than this. And what that tells me is there's like five placement records that do not have placement start date entered. And that's where I'm saying is like, your data may not be 100% accurate. And that is just looking and clarifying information. So if, let's say, perhaps I go back to default, I'm going to pop back in here and edit, put this here. And if I open the report, then look for our placement start date, I'm going to filter out entered records. And here are my 5 placements. We have a placement record, but we do not have placement start date entered. And so our data can be skewed and can miss, and it's literally a data entry problem, not a report problem. It's not that Sam is telling you the wrong information. It's that the records don't actually have the correct information on them. So in that, there's several situations that you could do: enforcing data entry on forms, or having Sam automate some data. Like when placement start date is entered, we always set placement status to active. When placement end date is entered, we change placement status to discharge, so that again, you're not dependent on human data entry, because we are humans. We get it wrong with a lot of just data entry because of the tediousness of that and the accuracy that's needed. So I am glad that I actually found a good example of where these filters can be challenging. What seems simple, what seems to make sense is like, of course, we're going to have a placement start date. We can see clearly in our records that we just didn't do this data properly. Before I move on with talking about other tools, do you guys have any questions on that? No? All right. Other things that can be done on a report, all the columns, you can sort, ascending, descending, filter. If I sort it, we've got kids by age. Maybe Sam doesn't even know the age because I didn't put date of birth in here. All of this, again, is kind of related to our data entry into the site. You can also filter out blank. So often, like I did here with placement start date, I filtered out the entered value so I could see what was blank, so I can fill in data where needed. That I use and recommend with clients on a regular basis when we're talking to folks. Same thing with report stats. Like, these are all empty. If this is your bare minimum that yeah, what do I want to call it? Of data entry on records, and you find that you've got a lot of empties, it's really important to clean this up, and you can pop in and edit this information. Leads me then to another tool that you can use in, or how you're using a report is you can edit. So the report has to actually be set up to allow editing. Depending on the report, that may be something you don't want people to do, especially if you have any automation that's built off of a specific table. As an example of that, I might not want to allow editing on this report, because when I put in the placement end date, we may really need the discharge reason. But if I put the end date in here, it's not necessarily going to be setting or that discharge reason, right? I don't have, Sam's not enforcing that data entry on me from a report. So if you look at placement reports as your final end all, you might want to make it not editable by your team members, so that they have to go to the record and go through the proper steps so that you get all the data entry that you need. Again, automation through auto actions can also help with the data entry so that you get more consistency. Let's see. So you can edit. You can also, for records, access records. So clicking on a name, you can open the entity's record in a new window, or this window. You can also filter or exclude specific entities. I know that there are people that work from reports to manage accounting, maybe even manage some progress reports of approving certain things. So you can exclude entities off. I know at a certain point, what that point is, I don't know, but you can start to have too many exclusions and the report gets a little wonky, because it's just, the query is starting to get really heavy for the for SQL Server. So you might want to set default filters instead of excluding entities continuously. The only other thing I feel like I see sometimes with this is apostrophes can act funny, where if somebody's name has an apostrophe, or like I notice it when we're working with agency data in our site, where if it's, I want to say all God's children, right? David's on, God's has the apostrophe S, and sometimes Sam doesn't like to filter on that. So it may be the way that the apostrophe is entered, if I had copied it or something, versus typing it in. So sometimes you'll see issue with that, but you can pop in and open, and that's where then you could take users through. This will open up the record here in a second. And so we can get to and do any administration that we want to do on that specific record. There's also an option to get to the sub record. So on this particular report, we're talking about placements primarily. If I click on this active and edit the field value, I can actually open, if you have a details form connected, I can open and get to the placement record specifically, that specific record. Rather than being taken to the child cover page, I'm now actually directed right into that placement where I want to make changes. And this again is right. Same thing could happen for users, where if you're press end date and you have some automation that says when the end date is entered, but the discharge equals reason A, if I enter reason A in the discharge reason field, after I put in placement end date, that auto action isn't going to happen. So you might direct your team over to a form that enforces that data entry, so you get all of it before the data point is saved. Okay, and of course, this screen doesn't have required fields on it, but if that were necessary for you, that's what I would do, is enforce with requirements. But this is, I think, often underutilized because you can't find it or people don't know. And so we may change where that is located, but it is super helpful to get right to the specific bits of data that you're aiming to do. So our screen was refreshing. There was, I'm fingers crossed, because when I got in here and checked before, looks nice. The print is now set how you like it, or how people who use print, where the title of the report is displayed here. The report is still running off because we just have too many columns on the report. So again, if your report is very wide, you'll need to change your layout to landscape. There's also settings in your printer that allow you to scale down and pull down. You can also add header and footer, which is going to add, timestamps and the actual report name on here. And then I can pull this way down. It's going to take a lot to get all of this data in. But I can pull it down to really get everything on it, or you're going to have to expand to a larger piece of paper. Really just depends on your report. Otherwise, if we had any kind of narrowing to a portrait size, it might become illegible, right? Just again, depends on how many columns you've got of how wide this is. But there are options for you with your browser's print function to make that more printable. In the coming up on our next release, that'll be done. Reports early on when we did this new version also had a sidebar. There were a lot of challenges just because we wanted to see the report larger. So the report menu is this little hamburger menu right here. Right now, when you click, it gives you other tools that you can play with. So we can edit the report, add report stats that I talked about, send bulk emails from reports. You can print templates. So I think this is fairly underutilized, but you are able to say, here's all the placements, and here's maybe the placements that discharge, and we need to print out face sheets for our paper files for that, or we've got to get this information out for everybody. We'll do it all at one time. I do see this utilized more often with accounting reports, generally foster care accounting, where people are printing foster parent statements on a regular basis. Another two tools that are useful for sure, especially if you find that your data is incomplete, is bulk updating records. You can use this to set every record that's shown here with a specific value. So I can pull in, I'm only given the tables that I've added to the report. I'm going to change this. This is our sample data. So I'm going to set placement status as active on all of these records. And so all those 141 placements, once this processes through, it's asking me, are you sure? I'm going to manage or be affecting 101 child records. And these are all the kids. This is not clickable, but I do have a list of who's going to be affected. And click here. And now I don't have a report stat set up. It'll let me know that it's done. But our placement status, you can see all of them are active. This is a super fast way to do data entry. You've got to be careful with it though, right? It's great when you feel confident with it. It's less great if you do data entry in a big swath that affects all the records and it's not really what you intended for it to do. So use it with caution, but totally use it. It is really helpful. Again, I would probably look for things where it's empty and you can do, 5 records, 10 records at a time to clean up your data. Let's see. The other thing here for bulk insert is, this is bulk inserting records. I believe here I can insert any record. So I'm just going to enter a child communication. This is literally going to add, well, instead of like updating the records that exist on that report, I'm going to actually be adding a communication record for all of these kids. So I can put in here, I choose the table first, right? Can only do one sub record at a time. This is really helpful. I see people doing this for probably for some communications, but also for, you could do accounting group sessions. That's what I'm thinking. If you have like group sessions, if that's something that your team does, and you've got a list of kids that you know came to that session last night, you could add a record in at one time. So I'll set the date. It's going to be today. Add in the body is, oh, did this get changed, Ryan? I'm happy about this. I don't know if you changed that
Yes.
or you said yes?
Yes, it's part of the
That is good. You should not be
message
able to
update.
see this. This used to be just a little line of input and you'd be typing in a whole paragraph and you couldn't read what was going on. Hello, this is awesome. There is a really old ticket that's probably 10 years old that has actually updated. I didn't know that got done. That's incredible. I'm happy about that. And I'll add a subject is our testing on Sam Talks. And then save. All of those kids are going to get this message added to their communication record. So this one might take a minute or two for it to run through or immediately, whatever. I love that. So I'm going to pop in, look at this record. And if I go to the communications, fingers crossed, everything worked just right because that went really fast. But here is our communication record. That is going to save hours and hours of
Click on
time.
that too.
This
Oh,
too
can't edit it.
can't edit there. If I pop in here. Oh, you can't edit the body trimmed. If it were the body message, I should be able to edit, but that's weird. I still can't edit that. We might need to do something, and I don't happen to have an edit form here. What was the goal, to show a WYSIWYG field?
Yeah, it's fixed there too.
Cool. Cool. So I just don't have a edit form on this communication record. Our test site gets kind of junky when we're just testing out things. So there's things that may not be exacting, but if I added a communication form that I could edit from this, would be that. And my assumption is, Ryan, if I add a new communication, it will be shown there. And that's what you're saying here.
Yeah, of course it'll be shown there. I meant with field value edit. When you're
Oh, okay, got
editing
you.
on a view form.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, we can look into that. Those are the primary tools keeping this data inside of SAM. Okay. There are 3 other tools here that you can use. Export email addresses is going to take, I believe when you pop through here, you actually, right, this is a report about children. So the first thing is always going to ask is, who do you want to exclude? Who are you limiting? Like if you've got data points that say this person is opting out of mailings, that's a good filter to have here. It's like, they don't want to be communicated with, so we're going to limit that. You can edit these filters here, and there is a default filter for each record type. We go through, because it's a child, we might not actually be writing to a child, but we might actually be writing to the foster family. Or extracting their data, or maybe we're trying to talk to the birth mothers or an adoptive family or whatever other record types they're associated. So you get to choose from record types that are connected. I believe this is all from the tables that you're pulling on. So if you were pulling on contacts and supports, and it's literally anybody that is connected, you could pull those that data, those emails, and it's pulling specifically email fields. I don't know if we're going to have any records here or not, just because I don't manage this data really well in our test site. But here's a bunch of email addresses that are connected, and copy them, paste them into whatever program you're aim is to go from. So you can use these as lists to create distribution lists, or import this into, you know, a MailChimp or Constant Contact or some other email marketing tool that you may use. Let's see. There are two other ones that I want to talk about here. Export to Excel. It's going to drop down an Excel or download an Excel file of exactly the filters, exactly the way that this report is set up. I kind of think if you put a filter on where we were limiting to just, you know, 2025 placements, it's just going to give us those records. It's not going to give us the full report. So it depends again on how your report is filtered. And then there's also a way to import data. Your data, it's not going to be a good setup for if you wanted to add a bunch of donation records, or if you wanted to add a bunch of communications that you may have from some other spreadsheet. This will pull in case, probably placement or adoption records, child information or family information, and it can disseminate it. Your report has to match exactly whatever your records are coming from, have to match how you've set up the report. And there's guides on how to do that, but it's mapping, right? As first name goes the first name, last name goes the last name. As an example of using that, you would not be able to put a name field that's like, you know, Stephanie Zasyatkina and into a first name field. Or if you do, my full name is going to go into the first name field. Okay, so it's going to map exactly, or the system, I think, will either warn you and say this data doesn't make sense. And it may even give you data integrity warnings as well. Like if you're trying to put a date field into an email spot, it isn't going to like that. So it's not going to accept that kind of information. Now we'll talk about editing a report. Again, you can build as many reports as you want. This is the report builder. It's giving you a preview at the top of all the columns or fields that you've got. You are able to modify the column order and set, you know, change placement of this data. You can remove fields. And this is really the same functionality that was in the old site, if you're familiar with that. So we could say, we're not caring about importing data right here. Maybe we don't want the case memo. Maybe we're done with the alert type, things like that. You can modify the column width. This is a little fiddly. I think ultimately there's too many columns on here. It doesn't have anywhere to go anymore. So you can kind of place with that. I use it only generally when there's like 5 columns on, because you have a lot more movement. This one's just really stacked, pretty tight. Let's see. This is your default filters here. So this is really what's going to say when you first open up that report, what subset of data you're getting. Yeah. So the filtering in and of itself is a big topic, so I'm not going to hit too much more than I have on that. But you can put in your filters. Again, you really need to audit the records that are displayed, because again, it may be a data entry issue, or it may be a filtering issue where the filters just need to be tweaked a little bit to encompass all of the type of records that your aim is to extract from that report. You can set up default sorting, and you edit that here. I think there's 3 options, maybe even 4, of how you sort data. So by default, we're looking at this. So we've got 3 choices. We might set it up by, you know, child name. You might do it by start date. If there's a bunch of kids that all place at the same time, then you might also add an additional one by child name. We'll put it as first name and ascending, right? So you can set up your sorting that makes sense to how your team is going to look at that. This gives you a record of what report stats you've got on, you could add additional report sets here, and you can edit the organization of these and how they're laid out on screen through this edit. There are some additional report options to show totals, averages, minimum and max. Totals doesn't always make sense. Neither does averages or minimum and max. And in order, right, it's really going to depend. Like, as an example, if we're looking at child age, counting up the total of all child ages is going to give you some weird number that just doesn't make sense for the report. So that's not necessary here. Same, I think, with total length of time. That's not going to be really helpful, but the averages and minimum and max will give you actionable data. And it might be vice versa. The field that you want to calculate these totals, averages, minimum, max for have to be set up. Otherwise, you'd have just potentially too much data. So the field, I'll show you in a second how you do that. Setting the records per page. You could show all, gosh, I'm not sure what all does if you have 50,000 records. Some agencies have worked with SAM for so long, they literally have 100,000 plus records in their site. Expect the report to be slow because the report is doing a lot of information grabbing of all the different tables you've selected and then having to pull all those records and look at any filters in order to gather that. So all probably not what you really want, unless you know you're looking at a caseload report and looking at all of them so that your team doesn't have to toggle through. That's useful. You can also set, this is where you set the report to be editable or not, and showing record counts on the report menu. If I set that and then pop over here, gosh, where did my report go? Did I change it? Let me go to the child reports and the placements all. Used to give counts, perhaps that no longer functions, but it should be like this, but I just don't see it here. So maybe it only shows on your report menu when it is yours specifically versus looking at family reports, but it'll give a count here for that. I'm gonna pop back over and look at this, make sure I've got this. Report menu, I'm saying it last. When you build a new report, it'll ask you, what are you titling this? And for report menu, it's not required, but y'all, after 10 years, frankly, after 1 year, we may not remember what that report was set up for. Putting in a memo will just help track people's minds of like, oh, it was that program or that campaign or that effort that we were doing to put the information on. Really, really helpful for your team to recall why you built a thing. But again, reports can be removed and rebuilt at any time. So if you see things that y'all don't know what it is, you're welcome to let that go, because I mean, everybody varies in how they believe, but with Sam, I am of the notion that less is more sometimes, especially when it comes to reports and finding things in the site. It's just kind of keeping your site clean. Speaking of delete, it's under advanced options. You can delete report.
Can you do me a favor and
Sure.
refresh the page real quick?
Sure. You can.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that checkbox was marked.
Oh, as to why that didn't show up?
Yeah.
And then modify the report name. You could do that too, to change the name. Like you can call it XYZ, which is again not going to be super clear to us. That's where any of your users, but your team pulling on the table will help, or certainly a hint will help explain what's going on with your reports.
You are correct. It does only show up when it's on your report menu.
Okay, cool. The only other thing that I feel like I've seen here today that I think is maybe something you don't do often is building your template report style. This is kind of a conversation that we had on last week's Sam Talks about templates. It is when this report is showing up on a template, how do you want that to look? It requires some HTML. Actually, here, we are choosing that, yes, we want this to show up in our default style, and the styles are displayed in settings under templates. But this says for this report, I want it to look like this, where you might have a totally different template that needs some information that's coming up in, instead of maybe like Calibri, it's coming up in Times New Roman for, you know, a state report or whatever, and you need it to look different. You can give it different styling. I don't really, template report, limit number of rows returned to. Oh, I get what that is. Sometimes you may want your last record and you don't have a report or a template based off the current or current table setup, or maybe you're just wanting to show the most recent communications, but just like the last 5. We don't need to see 20. We just need to show that we are giving we are communicating on this client record. That'll limit the number of records that are actually displayed on the report. So, and it's in advanced options for a reason, because for the most part, you probably don't want to use that, but there is a use case for that. Okay, that's what I have with reports. I think I've covered everything. The only thing that I can think of now, there is create copy of report. This is great for making those kind of case load reports, or here are the families in state A versus state B, or program A versus program B. If you like to have it separated like that, I don't think it's necessary all the time, but it really just varies on what is the purpose of your report, which again, your report memo can help explain. One last thing, I'm gonna have to poke around and see if I can find something. Let's say I really like this report, whatever this report is, just a test report or for whatever testing was being done. But let's say I really like this report. I can click the menu and add it to my report menu. That's going to put it, when I open up on the cover page, that report is now down here, or excuse me, on the home page. When I come here, that report is now accessible, so I can always get to it. It's an easy way for your team to find that report again. Okay. Now I'm really done. I didn't give a lot of time, but I'm looking for any questions if you guys have any on reports. If you have any questions on reports. No? Carrie, have you gotten into them? Or not quite yet?
Yeah, we've gotten into them. We're just, you know, muddling through the changes that we've made in the checklist, and then old data on clients, kind of like merging and going back and entering some of that stuff that didn't flow through. So our reports so far are good. I need to get in there and clean them up and delete old ones, but
sure,
what we have is working okay.
Okay, sweet. Good. David, do you have something?
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
On your unnamed cover pages for the individual, what used to be tabs,
Yes.
you showed how you can add reports to that. It seems like, shouldn't there be like view all child reports there in the sidebar?
Sure. Yeah, it totally could. Yes, it totally could have that. It doesn't have that right now, but it sure could.
Seems like that would be nice to have.
It would be nice to have, yeah. So we could consider that, right, Ryan? I mean,
We could consider it, but you also can do that on the homepage.
Yeah,
Just
so
go to the
like,
homepage and view all child reports.
Yeah, but it makes sense.
But
Like even Ryan, if we could have, I don't know if we'd have it here, but a way to toggle, because we do show view all often, where it's then could show up those words and just display them all. But yeah, we could consider it as a ticket. That's good feedback. Yeah, I don't know what the title of these pages should be. We did used to call them the entity tab, but that's when it looked like a tab, but I don't know that it looks like a tab anymore.
It's the entity homepage.
Entity homepage. Thank you, Ryan. Okay, I will name it properly so that I can remember in the future. Yeah, well, that's what I got today. So I'm going to stop this recording. And thank you.